Boldwood presents The Boy Next Door, written by Sian O'Gorman and read by Caroline Lennon. Chapter 1. If someone had told Claudia that the person she'd been looking for all along was right under her nose, she wouldn't have believed them. And he was the one who knew their connection way before she knew what was going on. At the time, all she knew was that she'd had enough of men and would be perfectly happy never to see another one. This had seemed the most sensible response to when she'd finally emerged, after a year or so, of getting over her unceremonial dumping by Dom. As deputy features editor on Ireland's biggest-selling women's magazine, Irish Woman, with an office right in Dublin city centre, Claudia's job had been the one thing that kept her sane while stewing over the breakup. She now knew she'd wasted 3 long years with the idiot, and her only regret was not ending it before he had. But worse was the fact it had been his flat they'd lived in, so she'd had to move out. Now, a year later, she barely thought about Dom, but it rankled that she'd allowed herself to feel anything for him. Claudia was a mere 32 and only just hitting her prime, as her best friend Grace repeatedly reminded her. But they both knew it was a tricky age to find yourself single. You could either commit fully to the apps or go hunting in the wild, old school, and beg every person you even vaguely knew to introduce you to the eligible and intelligent men of their acquaintance, or, as time ticked on, the ineligible and intelligible. There was, however, a third option. Go solo. And that was the route that Claudia chose. Enjoy being single. Revel in her independence. Her joyfully manless existence. However, she had no idea that her life was about to suddenly involve a plethora, a veritable bounty, an embarrassment of men. The good, the amusing, the fascinating, and even one who was downright evil. The ending with Dom had been brisk, blunt, and bruising. Worse, when Dom had sat her down for a serious chat, the thought crossed her mind that he might be about to propose. But instead of passionate professions of undying devotion, he calmly explained he didn't see much of a future for them. And so Claudia moved out that night, tearfully stuffing her old backpack with some clothes and wobbling off on her bike, wearing 2 coats because there was no other way of carrying them. By the time she arrived at her sister Fiona's, she had a puncture and had to walk the last mile along the Liffey, her front basket containing her makeup bag, laptop and a single shoe. After a couple of weeks of sleeping in her old bed in her mother's house, she heard of an available room from a friend of a colleague, which was close enough to work, a doable rent, and she jumped at it, sight unseen. It turned out to be a large flat on the 3rd floor of a crumbling Georgian building, just off Dublin's Bagot Street, and owned by the parents of Leisha O'Reilly Hayes, who had given up her job in a solicitor's office and reinvented herself as a social media influencer. Leisha always looked fabulous, her long golden hair falling over her shoulders, her fake tanned limbs, face lavishly made up, teeth white as a glacier mint. But however glamorous Leisha was, behind the scenes she lived in a state of chaos, unable to tidy the smallest thing away and scattering her belongings so liberally around the flat it was almost an art form. Who knew there were so many very obvious upsides to heartbreak? The amount of articles which sprung from her was almost dizzying. Over the last year she had penned the top 10 things not to do when heartbroken. How to fix your heart when someone has broken it. How to be alone when you don't want to be. 5 things to remember about yourself when a relationship has ended. Who are you now you're alone? And on and on. It had been a therapy, a way of writing herself out of that wound-licking, gruelling experience. It was Wednesday evening, the 1st day of September, and in the low-lit surrounds of Luigi's Pizza restaurant, Claudia and Grace caught up with each other's lives. The problem with Dom, said Grace, was that he had no discernible personality. You deserved so much better. I find a personality to be a basic requisite. Even a bad one is better than none at all. Grace was the office manager in the Celia Desmond Gallery, back in their home village of Sandy Cove, just a half an hour's commute from the city centre. But Claudia was not thinking of Dom. She was thinking of Tom, who had perhaps a little too much personality. He and Grace had only met 6 months earlier, but he was already living in her house and busy reshaping her world into one eminently more comfortable for him. Previously an insurance broker, he'd retrained as a psychotherapist and had nailed his framed diploma on Grace's living room wall, a special light trained upon it. Grace fully worshipped at the shrine of Tom, so she didn't see that this was perhaps a narcissistic move too far. And over the months, she'd changed from independent, know-her-own-mind woman to a slave to Tom's whims and whines. Going man-free makes complete sense, Claudia explained, refilling their glasses with the restaurant's second cheapest bottle of red wine. I can crack on with work, write my articles and save up for my own flat. It does sound much easier, Grace conceded. If I didn't have Tom, I'm sure I would be quite happy in my own manless universe. But isn't it ironic that just as you are manless, I've found my soulmate? She paused. Except he's so much better and cleverer than me. That's not remotely true. But it is. Grace's eyes were shining with love and happiness. I love that he's so clever. I just soak up all the intelligent things he says. And when he was in the gallery earlier today, chatting away, full of beans, pretending to help, saying the paintings were wonky. It was so funny. She smiled happily. You are coming to the next opening, aren't you? Celia says she hasn't seen you for ages. Tom says Celia is far too indulged, and if he was married to her, she wouldn't get up to half the things she gets up to. Grace laughed. I think he means how she flirts with other men, but her husband Michael never seems to mind. She's just so beautiful and charming she gets away with it. Grace shrugged. You're lucky too. Your hair falls properly in actual waves. Your eyes are a proper colour, like brown. Whereas mine are a strange hybrid, like a cat's, said Tom. But he hates cats, so I don't know what he meant by that. And you always look nice, as though you didn't leave the house by accident. Claudia laughed, picking up the menu, suddenly starving. I am sure Tom meant that as a compliment. Now, shall we order food? Actual food? Do breadsticks and wine not count? Tell that to Jesus. Grace picked up the menu. Pasta, she said immediately. Any kind. Claudia read the menu. Ravioli with sage butter? Done. Grace picked up another breadstick. Tom says that pasta is a sedative and that eating too much of it dulls the brain. Is that a fact? Claudia waved to the waiter, reminding herself that if Grace loved him, then she too would have to at least like him. And anyway, Grace had just reminded her of another benefit of being single. You could eat whatever you liked. Chapter 2. The following morning, Claudia was working away at her desk on the second floor of Hackett House, the home of Foxy Publishing. Every month, 4 magazines were produced in the building: Irish Woman, Irish Man, Irish Music, and Irish Knitting. All wildly different to each other, and the staff rarely mixing. Hackett House was situated right in the heart of Georgian Dublin, which was criss-crossed terraces and squares of beautiful 5-storey red-bricked, ivy-fronted mansions, famed for their brightly painted doors. Stepping through the doors of Hackett House every morning still gave Claudia a frisson, as she wondered what the day would bring. She loved her team, who all worked hard on Irish Woman, punctuating their day with chat about anything and everything, from meals eaten to holidays taken and updates on family dogs. Homemade cakes were brought in, chocolates handed around, and biscuits hoovered up. From the front desk, receptionist Bernadette greeted everyone, some with more enthusiasm than others. Claudia had seen her giving Blake Moriarty, the new editor-in-chief of all 4 publications, the side-eye when he'd asked her to order him a taxi. "Is your arm not working?" Claudia had overheard her saying. "Too busy scratching yourself? Go outside and wave them about and hail one yourself." Blake didn't run the company, however. The owner of Foxy Publishing was the titular Foxy, a man who had a head of fading red hair, and perhaps at a younger age had a burnished barnet. Now in his mid-60s, he had started Irishman decades earlier, and had grown the business to include all 4 titles. Claudia wasn't even sure he knew her name, but he always seemed ebullient and cheerful, calling out pleasantries or greetings as he moved quickly through reception. The only person who slightly ruined the atmosphere was Irishwoman's features editor, Amanda Buckley, a tiny woman who threw tremendous rages, and even occasionally staplers or sellotape dispensers. But they just heard that Amanda was being considered as the new editor of their fellow magazine, Irishman, on the floor above. No one else had arrived yet in the office, and Claudia was powering through a new article, provisionally titled "One is Fun, the deliciously empowering life force of being single." Their desks were piled high with books and plants, papers, printouts and proofs. There was an old dictionary and thesaurus, which looked like refugees from the last millennium, or maybe the one before that. Cardigans hung over the backs of chairs, spare shoes were lined up underneath desks, the accumulation of 20 years of magazine production, the sedimentary layers of labour, of previous employees and issues, amassing in this slightly cluttered but exceptionally well-ordered office. If you needed anything at all, someone would know exactly which shelf or which pile it was on. Claudia was soon in the zone, typing away, filling her screen with her thoughts on all the truly wonderful ways life opened up when you were unencumbered. She expounded on how trapped some women felt in relationships, how they put up with second best because they were sold a narrative that to be single was to be sad. She filled another page with famous quotes about the joys of being alone and a listicle about the pleasures of single life. But just as she was about to write another sidebar on famous single women living their best lives, Amanda entered and angrily threw her handbag, this season Chloe, onto her desk. They were all in clear and present danger of being on the receiving end of one of Amanda's infamous strops. Sensing the need for careful handling, Claudia used her most soothing voice. "Everything all right?" Amanda had now slumped into her chair. "I'm feeling horribly, extremely and completely stressed." Amanda's eye began twitching. "You see, they were meant to be finalising my promotion today. Blake says, you know Blake Moriarty, our editor-in-chief. He's the only man I've met who can carry off a padded gilet. Anyway, I'm digressing, and I always digress when I'm upset." The eye was now twitching alarmingly. "He's just told me I haven't got the job. He says it's out of his control." "Who made the decision?" "Bloody Foxy, as if he has any say in the matter." "He does own the company." Claudia immediately regretted her intervention. Amanda's top lip turned inwards, as though it was stuck to her teeth. "He might technically own the company," she growled. "But why is he involving himself with the hiring and firing? Blake says Foxy is past it. Quite doddery these days. According to Blake, the executive board expects him to retire soon and sell his remaining shares. Or they will force him out due to incompetence. He doesn't even have a majority. Gave shares away foolishly when he was younger. Anyway, we can't have a doddery CEO, can we?" "I doubt he's senile," began Claudia. But Amanda's eyes started to boggle again and she quickly shut up. "Blake's in charge," Amanda snapped. "There's a board meeting arranged in a couple of weeks, which is basically a takeover. Foxy can't expect to hold on to a business if he's not compos mentis, can he? It's selfish, if you ask me. And I think they are going to get rid of Irish knitting and Irish music. I mean, who actually knits these days? Lots of people. But Amanda wasn't really listening any longer, so Claudia gave up. And because she'd skipped breakfast and her writing flow was ruined, she escaped to go and buy herself a coffee and a bun from the cafe across the road. Just as she was about to leave through the main door onto the street, the sky was suddenly obscured. A large man with dyed blue-black hair was barreling through the door, forcing her to stand to one side. He had a disproportionately small face and was mainly pinstriped dark grey three-piece suit with the waistcoat buttoned over his large stomach and miniature polished shoes poking out from the end of his trousers. Claudia knew him. A shiver rippled through her as she stared, trying to place him. The memory crystallised, and it came back to her. It was the week of her father's funeral, when she was 15 years old. He'd knocked on their door, explaining he was her father's old friend and financial advisor. The man's name, how could she forget, was Brian O'Brien. It transpired her father, Philip, was liable for a huge debt after an investment went wrong, and Brian arrived to collect his money. And now, all these years later, he was scuttling towards the lift like a cockroach as Claudia watched, heart pounding, wondering what on earth he was doing in Hackett House. Shaken, she left the building, her mind full of Brian O'Brien, and that night, when he'd arrived at their house, like a portent of doom. The three of them, her mother Patsy, her older sister Fiona, and herself, were already in a state of shock after a series of terrible tremors, beginning with the awful call from the hospital, telling them about the heart attack. And when they'd rushed to his bedside, he'd looked so pale and small, surrounded by tubes and wires, so unlike their handsome and smiley father. He had managed to put an arm around his two girls, his voice not like his usual one. "I'm surer than sure that I love my two girls," he'd said, which was what he'd always said, but no one was prepared for him to never come home. A cold dampness settled deeply within their whole family. The house, never the same again. They tried to keep each other going, and their neighbours rallied, standing with them as the hearse collected the body for that final journey to the crematorium. Their next-door neighbour, Mrs. Hogan, had her arm around Patsy, almost holding her up for the whole day. And her son, Johnny, took it upon himself to carry in extra chairs and shift the sofa to accommodate all the visitors. Mrs. Hogan had appeared with plates of ham sandwiches and fruitcakes, her best china, a lace tablecloth, and made enough tea for the stream of handshakers and well-wishers, and was the last to leave, she and Johnny washing and drying and putting the house back together again. But then, a day or so later, there was that knock on the front door that somehow made everything worse. Claudia had answered, expecting another neighbour with an Irish stew and a loaf of brown bread, but instead it was a man, looming over her, a sour smell off his breath. She had found herself almost frozen in his shadow and unable to smile, even the fake one she'd been using lately when people asked how she was. "You must be Fiona." "Claudia." "Brian O'Brien." His smile was oleaginous. His hair dyed Elvis black, and he still had hold of her hand, like the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood. "I commiserate you on his passing." He smiled again, little toothy daggers. "Your mother is in, is she?" "I'll just get her." Relieved to be free of his sweaty hand, Claudia ran along the hall and into the kitchen, where Patsy and Fiona were washing up. "Who is it?" Patsy tried to smile, as though everything hadn't been turned upside down. "It's a friend of Dad's," Claudia said. "He wants to speak to you." Patsy quickly wiped her hands on a tea towel and left the room. "I'm so bored of visitors," Fiona fumed angrily. "It's constant. I can't bear it. And we have to be so nice. We're not allowed to cry or anything because that just makes everyone awkward." "No one has said we're not allowed to cry." Claudia tried to remain reasonable. If she was calm and sensible, then she might be able to cope with the chaos which had tornadoed her world. The tears would start, and then stop, and then start again, as though the cold dampness was seeping through her as well. They could hear Patsy and the man going into Philip's study. The girls looked at each other. "Who was he again?" Fiona asked. "Brian O'Brien." Fiona began to laugh, which was good because it was the opposite to crying, a kind of shield against soggy tears. "Who calls their child Brian when your surname is O'Brien?" Under any other circumstances, Claudia too would be laughing. But this last week, she had wondered if she might ever laugh again. Meanwhile, Fiona was giving it a good go, but gave up. Tossing a tea towel towards Claudia, she said, "You can dry, and don't try to get out of it like you normally do." Claudia began to wipe. "He looked horrible, like Cruella de Vil. She was a woman." "Yes, but..." It was hard to explain. "Just forget him." But that had proved impossible, because it turned out that Brian O'Brien was the reason Philip had left them no money. Their father had invested in a company owned by this Brian, and when it failed, Philip's estate was liable. They didn't ever really understand it, but they knew there was no money. Pennies were pinched. They scrimped, they saved, and Patsy took on longer shifts on reception at the doctor's surgery. It had been a tough and worrying time, but somehow they'd survived. The biggest lesson Claudia had learned was that somehow when your world ends, even after being broken up into a million pieces, you managed to stick yourself together again, imperfectly, scarred, chipped, but alive. It was a lesson she'd taken with her through life. She had hoped she would never see Brian O'Brien ever again. But here he was, hale and hearty at Hackett House, and Claudia couldn't help feeling it was a bad omen. Chapter 3. At least for Claudia's sister, Fiona, the course of true love was rattling along smoothly, as she and long-term boyfriend John Paul Kearney had finally decided to get married. There hadn't been a proposal or anything like that. Fiona hated frills and fuss, but more of a gradual acceptance that after being together so long, they might as well. "We get on," Fiona explained to Patsy and Claudia when she casually dropped into conversation over a Sunday roast in Viennetta that there was to be a wedding. "And neither of us is getting any younger." Fiona and John Paul were both ancient, at the age of 33. And anyway, John Paul is just so nice. He really was, a fact they'd all agreed upon since they'd first met him years earlier. He and Fiona now lived in a small terrace close to Dublin's old port, just under a railway bridge, and next to a shop which never closed. The location caused much consternation for John Paul's parents, especially his mother Josephine, who couldn't bear to think of her only living child living in such an insalubrious location, and had declared she would never visit. Fiona hoped Josephine would keep this vow, and so far she had. Josephine, who had a penchant for gold lame and drawn-on eyebrows, had never approved of Fiona. Perhaps because she didn't come from a family who frequented golf clubs or holidayed in the glitzier parts of Marbella. Despite his unbearable parents, Josephine and Robert, somehow John Paul had avoided their worst traits and was lovely to his future mother-in-law, solicitous to Claudia, and seemingly couldn't ever do enough for Fiona. It was Thursday evening, and the Kearneys had invited their circle to celebrate John's father's term as golf club chairman, and also, as an add-on, John Paul and Fiona's engagement. Claudia and Patsy stood on the doorstep of the Kearneys' mock Tudor double-fronted house, clutching bottles of wine and posh chocolates. "Remember, don't stare at Josephine's eyebrows," said Claudia, trying to make her mother laugh. But Patsy was determined not to be drawn, unlike the eyebrows. "You look lovely," said Patsy, changing the subject. "Your hair is beautiful." "I'm still letting it grow," said Claudia. She had had it cut short in a bob for the 3 years she'd been with Dom, and as a result of being too consumed with her heartbreak, she hadn't kept up with her regular trims, and now her blonde hair was longer than her shoulders. "It suits you, and the dress brings out the green of your eyes." "Thanks, Mum." She was lucky, she knew, to have the kind of mother who thought everything she did and wore was perfect. Grace's mother was the opposite, and couldn't help herself critiquing Grace's every move. From a dress which was too tight, hair which was either too long or too curly, and wearing too much makeup or too little. Josephine answered the door dressed in a shimmering caftan. "Patsy, and..." She looked at Claudia for a moment as though trying to remember her name. They went through this charade every time. "Claudia." "Indeed, indeed." Josephine ushered them in, air-kissing Patsy and then Claudia. "Well, isn't this nice?" She spoke in a tone of voice that suggested it was anything but. "It's so lovely of you to host a party for Fiona and John Paul," said Patsy, handing over the gifts. "And beautiful caftan, Josephine. You look like a goddess." "Don't I just?" Josephine was evidently delighted someone had noticed. "Isn't it divine? Joan Collins has the same one." Placing their gifts on the hall console, she led them through to the large living room, filled with men in red trousers and women in floral separates. Josephine swept through, across the nauseatingly swirly burgundy and cream carpet, which matched the curtains, and past the heavy mahogany furniture, which looked as though it belonged in a Bunratty Castle medieval banquet experience. Fiona and John Paul were on the other side of the room, talking to, or rather being talked at, by a large man with a larger moustache. His words floated over the general hubbub. "And so I said to him, 'You can't park there. It's members only.' He had no choice but to move his filthy plumber's van round the back." Fiona waved. "I'll be over in a bit," she mouthed. Josephine came to a halt beside the unlit faux-logged fire. "I'll park you two beside the mantelpiece," she announced. "When women are on their own without a man at their side, they can feel a little at sea. Here, you won't be so visibly alone. Food is on the table, and drinks. You can help yourself, can't you?" Before they were able to answer, Josephine and her caftan flapped away to greet other far more important guests. Claudia nabbed 2 glasses of fizz from a nearby table, along with a selection of canapes on a small plate. "Next time, we should bring a cardboard cutout of a man. We could pretend to talk to it," she said. "In fact, the conversation might be more animated than most conversations people have with their Tinder dates." She began to tell Patsy about some of the things her colleagues, Jess and Terry, had divulged about their adventures in online dating. "It's another reason why I love my manless pact. These sausage things are nice, aren't they?" "And the salmon pinwheel things are delicious," began Patsy. "Now, tell me more about this manless pact. Is this some kind of cult?" "Well," Claudia was just about to expound on her new theory, when a man in socks, sandals, green knitted jumper and large glasses materialised beside them, beaming. "Patsy, what an extremely pleasant surprise." But Patsy seemed to be making slightly strange movements, along with muffled squeaking sounds. Her eyes were watering, and she had begun to wave her arms. Instead of panicking, the man, with impressive and decisive speed, suddenly and swiftly hit her sharply, like an assassin, between her shoulder blades. Patsy swallowed. "Thank you, Alan. For a moment, I thought I wasn't going to make it." She began to laugh, perhaps from relief at being back from the brink. "Imagine death by salmon pinwheel." The man was smiling too. Glad to be of assistance. Good to know I haven't lost my touch. Patsy turned to Claudia. This is Alan Dunn, one of the doctors in the surgery. He held out a brown and hairy hand. Very good to meet you, Claudia. I've been hearing about you and your sister for a very long time. And now, finally, face meets reputation. Shaking his hand felt like shaking that of a squirrel, or at least what Claudia imagined it would feel like. Small, furry and delicate. Do I talk about the girls that much? Asked Patsy, smiling back at him. The right amount, I would say. Releasing Claudia, Alan turned back to Patsy. Although I don't think you can talk about your children enough. I certainly go on about my Paul, and he's nearly 40. Patsy smiled at him. What brings you to the party? Do you know Robert and Josephine? I was invited just today, when Robert was in the surgery, said Alan. I hummed and hawed, but at the last minute talked myself into it. My Paul is always saying work should not be a substitute for a social life. And he's right, of course. But I enjoy my work. And my colleagues. His eye lingered a little on Patsy. I didn't know that their John Paul was engaged to your Fiona. I'd never put two and two together. Oh, what have we here? It was Josephine again, slowing down to a stop. A little gathering of the Sea Road surgery. She smiled another of her terrifying grimaces. We have a doctor's receptionist, and... She turned to Claudia. What is it you do again? A pamphlet thing, isn't it? You are so lucky to be working. Girls these days need to be independent because so few of them have a nice man in their life. All I hear on the radio is about dwindling egg reserves and all sorts of unmentionables, and the perils of too tight underwear. Her laugh sounded as though she'd been shot in the back. Being a medical person, you'd know all about it, Doctor. Women think they have it all, and then, oh dear, eggs dwindled to nothing. She sighed. I wish young women would realise that you can't have it all. Men do not want to be at home minding the baby, let me tell you, whatever those feminists say. Am I right, Doctor? Well, he coughed a little. I don't know if... I can't say if... Well... He looked helplessly at Patsy. But Josephine suddenly yelled surprisingly uncouthly at Fiona across the room, as though shouting for emergency assistance. Come and keep your family company. They know no one here. They are quite fishes out of water. They know me, said Alan pleasantly. Fiona and John Paul hastily came over, and Fiona hugged Patsy and then Claudia. I have my happy face on, she said, just loud enough for Claudia to hear. Do I look ecstatically grateful for this lovely gathering? Claudia whispered back, I think your happy face might need a little fine-tuning. The two sisters were very different. In their appearances, Fiona was dark-haired and taller than Claudia, and her eyes were brown, but also in their personalities. Fiona was methodical, unromantic and corporate, and could never have spent a life writing for a living, conjuring articles from her brain. But they'd grown up sharing a bedroom, and there was nothing which bonded you more with someone than conversations after dark from your bed, where you talked about life, the universe, and if Jason Fitzpatrick was going to ask you to his levers, Debs. Beside them, introductions between John Paul and Alan were going on. Dr. Alan Dunn from Church Street Surgery, Josephine was saying. General practitioner, isn't that right, Dr. Dunn? We call ourselves Doc of all trades. Alan beamed at John Paul. Bit of everything. Expert in choking, said Patsy, making Alan laugh. That's right. I rise to the occasion. He turned to Fiona. And you must be Patsy's eldest. Fiona took his hand. Fiona. Alan. He smiled at her. Very good to meet you all. I have been longing to put faces to the names for many years. I'm so sorry for your loss. Fiona looked confused. Our dad? Well, yes, but... He looked a little awkward for a moment. I was actually thinking of your dog. Petal, wasn't it? Didn't she pass away recently? She was also on your mother's list of favourite topics. She sounded like a lovely dog. Petal had been one of the ways they had managed to glue themselves back together again, and had only died 6 months earlier, after a life of service to the three of them. Josephine, bored of the conversation, was looking around for a neat exit when her eyes alighted on Cameron Duffy, John Paul's best friend from school, who had just arrived and was making his way towards them. Tall and handsome, with a wave of brown hair, he was wearing a loose, smart navy sweatshirt and navy chinos, and a huge smile. He slapped John Paul on the back. "How's it going?" "Ah, Cameron." Josephine was delighted. "I was asking John Paul where you were. We cannot, I said we simply cannot have a gathering without him." "Lovely to see you again, Cameron," said Patsy. "And you too." Cameron smiled at Claudia and Patsy. "I just can't believe these two are finally getting married. Never thought they would." He gave John Paul another light arm punch. "Neither did we," laughed John Paul. "I mean, it's not important to us. Bureaucracy gave us the push. Tax and all that. And we just thought we may as well." "The last of the great romantics," teased Cameron. "Honestly, you'll be writing love poems next." John Paul laughed again. "Sorry if we can't oblige, Cameron. Anyway, Fiona would hate me to write a poem." Fiona didn't seem to be listening to any of this and had taken out her phone to check something. But she looked up. "Depends on the poem," she said. "I wouldn't object to a good one." She gazed back at John Paul, who laughed. "But I would only be able to write bad ones, so it's probably better if I don't attempt one," he said. "I'm not the most romantic person. I like to be practical. Don't I, Fee?" "Hmm?" She was barely listening again and was back looking at her phone. Obviously bored, Josephine interrupted, claiming Cameron by slipping her arm through his. "Cameron, have you tried the salmon mousse? You really must. It's divine, even if I say it myself. Not that I made it myself." She gave another of those shot-in-the-back laughs. "You know me, I wasn't made to wear an apron. Come along, Cameron." As she led him towards the food table, Claudia glanced over at Fiona. But Fiona was looking away, a glazed look in her face, as though she had zero interest in what was happening here in this room, and wished she was anywhere else. Chapter 4. Grace. "Remember opening of new exhibition this evening? It's the John Hogan exhibition. Remember I told you? He's from Sandy Cove. Just met him for the first time today. He's amazing. Just doing the press invites now, and I'll put your name on the door. You're going to love it. See you later." It was Friday morning, and Terry cleared her throat. "Ahem, ladies," she said, to Claudia and Audrey, who were sitting at their desks in the Irish Woman office. "Big news. You know, Amanda's definitely now not leaving." "Not leaving?" Audrey looked a little shaken. "As in never leaving, or just not leaving today?" "Foxy is choosing his new editor of Irish Man today," Terry said. "Paulie and Marco in the postroom heard it from Bernadette on reception, and she heard it from Foxy himself." Terry readjusted her framed George Clooney photograph on her desk. It was her lucky emblem. The only time she had turned it away was the weekend after his Venice wedding. "It was just nice to think he was single," she had explained at the time. "It was a comfort." "Foxy obviously didn't want Amanda," said Audrey. "He's got better sense." "But Amanda said he was dottery," said Claudia. Terry let out a kind of hoarse noise. "Doddery? Foxy? Hardly. He's as sharp as ever. Even though he's looking a little tired, and probably should lay off the red wine. But his wife left him last year, and we all need our little comforts." She gazed briefly at her photograph of George, who smiled comfortingly back at her. "She went off to Spain to do yoga on the beach or something, so it's understandable if he's looking a little careworn, as well as the stress of a potential hostile takeover." I know at least 4 other women who've done the same, mused Audrey, left the rat race and opened up retreats. It's the new midlife crisis of the disaffected woman. She turned to Claudia. You should write about it. Claudia was just about to answer when Amanda walked back in. Gossiping again, ladies. She shot a particularly venomous look at Terry. Talking about me? They all blushed a little, immediately chastised, but also nervous that Amanda might start shouting. You've heard about the job then, Amanda said. Foxy has chosen someone else. The old fool. Honestly, he should be locked up in an old folks' home. You're thinking of prison, said Jess. That's where they lock people up. Or perhaps you were talking metaphorically, suggested Audrey, but your metaphor was all wrong. Audrey always took her editing very seriously, especially grammar, punctuation and misplaced metaphors. Oh, do shut up, growled Amanda. Blake has only just heard. He's furious. But it's not Blake's decision, began Audrey, but she was silenced by another of Amanda's looks. Well, whoever does get chosen, said Amanda, they will soon find out it's a poison chalice. Blake was saying that the Irish Man team are all dreadful. Talentless, moody, unmotivated. They tried to revolt against Blake a month ago, which led to the editor leaving. Blake says they're like the Vinegar Hill mob, shaking their pitchforks and dancing at the crossroads. Again, began Terry, but quickly thought better of correcting Amanda. A smile flickered on Amanda's lips. Anyway, it's only temporary. Foxy will be gone soon, and there'll be a new team in charge. And then Blake says... She was interrupted by Claudia's desk phone ringing. Claudia, it's Keane from Foxy's office. I wonder if you have time for a meeting. It wasn't an invitation, it was definitely an order. But not here in Hackett House. Do you know Ernie's Cafe on Merrion Lane? Are you sure you have the right person? Claudia was aware that everyone was listening in. Amanda even had her head on one side, eyes squinting, with the effort of trying to hear both sides of the conversation. Yes, quite sure. Keane was brisk. Foxy has a busy morning ahead. As soon as possible. He's there now. Thank you, Claudia. He ended the call. Who was that? Amanda had a glint in her eye, sensing something was up. Was that Keane? Did he say Foxy wanted to meet you? She looked incredulous for a moment, but then that smile again. He must be sacking you. What have you done? Stealing stationery? Embezzling expenses? Tax fraud? I knew it. It's always the quiet ones. Well, you all get found out in the end. She nodded, satisfied with her theory. Terry, Audrey and Jess looked on, concerned, as Claudia gathered her things and left the office with a breezy, "See you all soon." However, her nerves were beginning to jangle as she stepped out into the world. And even though it was a lovely day in early September, the sky was blue and there was a warmth in the air, she didn't notice any of it, focused as she was on why Foxy wanted to meet her. Was she going to be sacked? Had she done anything wrong? Baggot Street was, as always, full of traffic, kamikaze couriers and crowds on the pavements. Outside the golden-fronted pub, Donaghy and Nesbitt's, barrels of Guinness were being launched from the back of a truck and rolled through a trapdoor in the street. Large sacks of flour were being hauled into Luigi's restaurant, while besuited office workers waited for coffee at Shot. Claudia turned left onto Merrion Street towards the Merrion Hotel, which was her favourite in the city. One of those old-fashioned, glorious places where there was always a turf fire or an afternoon tea to be had, or a drink in the lovely bar. Beside the hotel was a small lane, which she'd never been down before, but ahead she could see a striped awning and a blackboard sign. Speciale, today only, linguini alla vongole, and the finest tiramisu this side of Roma, Ernie's Mama's recipe. Audrey would hate those multiple exclamation marks, thought Claudia. Why did Foxy want to meet in this strange little cafe? Inside, it was like stepping into the back streets of Rome, or Palermo, with clattery chairs, pastel formica tables, Italian opera filling the air, vintage posters of Italian resorts hung on the walls, At the back was a counter with a large coffee machine and a wooden platter piled high with ciabatta sandwiches. Foxy was at a corner table beside the window, looking at her curiously, taking her in. She did the same. He was a big man, with a broad chest, radiating the kind of ebullient charm that happy and successful men often did. And today he was wearing a navy blazer over a pink-striped open-necked linen shirt. His face was lined, his white hair curled around his ears, and his eyes under his bushy brows were bright and intelligent. But she felt immediately that his usual swaggering confidence was missing. He looked somehow, although Claudia thought she must be mistaken, almost nervous. Chapter 5. Foxy stood up in a rush, as though only just recovering his manners, holding out his large hand. "It's such late notice. You found Ernie's all right. Oh, obviously you did, because you're here." He smiled. "This is where I come when I don't want to bump into anyone. My not-so-secret office." He gestured to the chair beside her. "Please take a seat. I want to... there was something I wanted to talk to you about." "Of course." Claudia hesitated. "Call me Foxy. Most people do. Well, apart from my family. My mother forbade it." He gave a laugh. "She didn't like me being called Foxy, but it started in boarding school, when I turned up with my red hair." "Coffee?" Claudia gave a nod, unable to quite find her voice, as Foxy called over to the back of the cafe. "2 cappuccino, Ernie, please." He turned back to Claudia. "You live in town?" "That's right." "And you like it?" She nodded, and then, due to nerves, found herself rambling almost incoherently. "It's handy being so close to everything, and I was lucky to find a place because I had to move out of my old flat because it belonged to my ex-boyfriend, and he decided that he no longer wanted a relationship with me." She tried to laugh, embarrassed that her awkwardness and desperation to fill the silence had led her to talk about her failed romance. Foxy looked aghast, probably at the quality of her small talk. "Why did he end it?" "He said there was no future in us. He didn't love me enough, I suppose." "He didn't deserve you," Foxy said, nodding at her as though it was obvious and the case was closed. "Fool." She hoped he was referring to Dom. "Anyway," he said, "you're having fun at Irish Woman." Claudia smiled, feeling her nervousness dissipate. Foxy seemed kind, considerate, caring, and not remotely doddery. "It's my dream job. I feel so lucky to work there. I wake up every day wondering what the day is going to be like." She sounded like an overly earnest lunatic. "It's so exciting." And he was grinning back at her. This time, a proper sun-splitting smile, as though he too had relaxed. His nervousness, if that's what it was, also gone. "Magnificent. Truly. I used to go to a school and had a teacher. The only good teacher there. The rest were sadists and god-awful excuses for human beings. But this one teacher was inspiring, and he always used to say, 'Boys, you're all privileged young men, and you will grow up to be privileged older men. Success is many things. It's making money, deals, whatever. It's the first-class seat or the big car. But the only success that really matters is if you make other people happy.'" Foxy smiled again at Claudia. "I'd forgotten that over the years. Too busy chasing all the other kinds of success. Joy stopped being a priority." A small man, wrapped in a huge white apron, with a face that reminded Claudia of one of the penguins at Dublin Zoo, came over with their coffees. He had a long, faded scar which snaked from his scalp, behind his ear, and down to his neck. "Ernie, this is Claudia. Claudia, one of my best friends in the world. Ernesto Di Lucia." Ernie clasped her hand, beaming. "I am so happy you're here. You are very welcome." "How's the property business?" asked Foxy. "Any profits to be made these days?" Ernie shrugged. "The market is what I call in attesa. It's holding out, not sure where it will go." Ernie has a pretty impressive property portfolio, explained Foxy to Claudia. But the cafe is his real love. Isn't that right, Ernesto? He opened it a couple of years ago now. An antidote to his property empire. Ernie nodded. You have to do something for love and something for money. This is my love. Foxy, what do you do for love and what do you do for money? I thought they were the same thing, Foxy said. Well, they used to be, for me. Now I don't know. All my love is gone. He turned back to Claudia. See how it is with Italians? They have Irishmen talking about love as though it's a normal topic of conversation. Ernie, we should be talking about rugby and how Ireland is going to trounce Italy in the Six Nations. Ernie laughed and pinched Foxy's cheek. When Italy beat Ireland, that will be a good day. There will be a lot of love then. He and Foxy laughed suddenly together. I'll leave you two to your very important meeting, he said, before following a couple who'd just arrived. Foxy turned to Claudia. Now, I'd like to tell you a little story. I started Irish Man more than 40 years ago. Still a student then, editing the college magazine, the usual route. Anyway, I wanted to make some money. There were women's magazines, obviously, but I had this idea that Irish men would like something just for them. And I was right. Immediate success, advertising off the scale, sales unbelievable. We had something really good.